Today we're diving into the world of Ermine Buttercream, one of the most unique frostings. And I've studied a lot of buttercreams. This one stands out for its texture, stability, and versatility. And the science behind it is fascinating. It's because it uses a sweetened flour paste, which then gets combined with butter. This creates a frosting with the following characteristics. It has a lighter texture. With a butterfat content at 28%, this frosting is deceivingly light, and some describe it as whipped cream-like with a delicate yet creamy texture. It tastes less sweet. Coming in at 27% sugar content, this buttercream is one of the least sweet. It is more heat stable. Ermine Buttercream is relatively more reliable than most buttercreams as it can withstand slightly warmer temperatures. It is easy to modify. Ermine's simple ingredients offers flexibility, making it easy to adjust and customize for different flavors. Now, this frosting has been around for probably 100 years, and there are many right ways to make it. So I'm going to start with showing you my base recipe, and along the way I'll explain how it works so you can become an Ermine frosting expert. The ingredients I'll need for this frosting are all-purpose flour, sugar, whole milk, heavy cream, unsalted butter, and flavor enhancements such as salt and vanilla. The first thing I have to do is make the flour paste. To prep, I'll set aside a flat tray or plate along with a strainer. So into a pan, I'm going to add the flour and sugar and whisk in the milk and heavy cream. And I'm going to heat this on medium-low until it thickens into a paste. The secret to a super smooth texture with your Ermine buttercream is evenly distributing the starch granules from the flour within the milk. So to do this, I'm going to whisk for this entire step. Now, once I see the bubbles pop in the center, the paste is near or at boiling temperatures. I'm going to start my timer and whisk the entire time. And the formula is 1 minute for every cup of liquid. And here I'm using about 2¼ cups of milk and heavy cream. So that's 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Cooking for this long ensures that I dissolve all the sugar and cook all the flour thoroughly. It also dissolve some of the water, so the end result is a thick and smooth flour paste. Now I'm going to scrape this into my tray. If you're aiming for a silky smooth texture, it's a good idea to run this through a sieve to ensure that there are no lumps formed during the whisking process. Now I have to let this cool to room temperature. If you leave it uncovered, evaporation will occur more quickly on the surface of the paste, and that'll thicken into a skin, and that'll cause lumps in your frosting. So to prevent this, I take a piece of plastic wrap and I spray it with a bit of oil and cover the surface directly to prevent this from happening. Now I'm going to aerate or lighten the texture of the butter a bit. And to do this, we want to ensure that the butter is at around room temperature. So I add the butter to my mixing bowl and whisk on high speed for about 2 minutes. The butter should be lighter in texture and color, but still ball up inside the whisk. Here you can see the before and after. So out of the box, butter does contain a tiny bit of aeration. It's about 1 to 7% of the butter's total volume. That's actually made of air. So it's very little. And I find that when I add butter just straight up into an Ermine buttercream, it makes it slightly denser. So I like to aerate my butter to give it a lighter texture. Fat absorbs flavor very well, so during this step, I also like to add my vanilla and salt. Now I'm going to combine the paste and the butter together. Here you can see how thick my paste is. You can easily pick it up with a spatula. And now I'm going to add the paste in about 4 to 5 additions. I'm going to add the first amount, then whisk on high speed for about 30 seconds before adding the next amount of paste. At the end of this step, the frosting is going to have these huge air pockets because I used the whisk. It's going to look uneven, but it's okay as long as I don't see any patches of flour paste streaked within the bowl. Now I'm going to switch over to the paddle attachment to smooth out the buttercream. If you have the one with the silicone edge, that one's my favorite for smoothing out frostings, but the metal one works really well too. And you're going to mix on low speed for at least 2 to 3 minutes. At the end of this step, the frosting will look smoother, but it might still have a few air pockets. That's normal and that's okay. Because this frosting has a lower ratio of butterfat and uses that kind of sticky flour paste, it doesn't get 100% smooth at this step. So don't let this deter you. Once you use a metal spatula over the surface, it's going to smooth out a lot more. The final texture of Ermine buttercream might be a little bit softer than what you're used to, particularly if you're coming from another buttercream like American Buttercream, which is the butter and powdered sugar variety, or even something like Swiss Meringue Buttercream. The texture is often described as something between a whipped cream and a buttercream. And this texture proved to be a little bit problematic when I was trying to smooth it onto my red velvet cake. There were times when this separation occurred, almost as if the emulsion had broken when I was trying to smooth out the size of the cake with a scraper. And I would have to go over small spots repeatedly to get it smooth. I would say that it probably took 50% longer than it normally takes me to frost a cake. With piping, it does perfectly fine. It can pipe super intricate designs and tall swirls, no problem. My takeaway for this is that if you're a beginner, I would suggest trying another buttercream if you're just learning how to get that super smooth exterior on a cake. On the other hand, if you're a veteran cake decorator, be sure to just give yourself a little bit of extra time, or at least be okay with having the cake look a little bit more rustic. Ermine Buttercream has better heat stability than most other buttercreams. I did a video a while back comparing the stabilities of various buttercreams by placing them in a heated and humidified tank. Of all the 8 that I tested, Ermine Buttercream was the top buttercream. It held its shape at temperatures up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit and 74% humidity. So I think the heat stability of this buttercream is due to a fundamental characteristic, and that is that there's a lower ratio of butter, which leaves room for a higher ratio of that sweetened flour paste. Now, the sweetened flour paste is very well suited to endure warmer temperatures. So let me explain. The sweetened flour paste gets its thickened texture because of the flour. When the flour is heated with water, the starch granules in the flour absorb the water and swell. And as the heat increases, the granules break open and some of the starches inside leak out. This process is called gelatinization. And as the mixture cools, some of those starches can stick together and trap water, and this forms a gel. This process is called gelation. This flour paste gel is heat stable, at least around the ambient or even warmer room temperatures that cakes are typically served. To put it in perspective, butterfat starts to melt around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Starch-based gels do break down, and it sometimes depends on the type of starch, but generally they start to melt at 140 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit. This is why you'll see butter-heavy buttercreams deflating before Ermine, which has a good amount of that sturdy starch gel to hold it in place. Now, the ability for the sweetened flour paste to give us that heat stability hinges on another important interaction, and that is how well does the paste emulsify with the butter? And what I found is that this is dependent on the type of milk that you use in the paste. I conducted an experiment to test how different milk fat contents affect Ermine frosting texture. The control in the middle uses whole milk. To its left, I tested 2% milk and then skim or non-fat milk. Towards the right, I wanted to see what happened when I increased the amount of milk fat. I tried a mix of whole milk and heavy cream, and lastly, whole milk with added buttermilk powder. I apologize that it's hard to see in this video, but the differences are very clear in person. The emulsion loosens as the fat content decreases, making the frosting harder to smooth. There are large, uneven pockets of liquid and tiny butter fragments sliding around. And I find that this issue becomes even more pronounced in larger batches as mixers can struggle to emulsify them properly. So from this, I gathered that it's better to work with higher fat milks. And you may be wondering why I didn't just test adding more butter to stabilize the frosting. Butter is high fat, but it's not the right kind, and it typically has the opposite effect and will make the buttercream looser. We need a specific kind of emulsifying fat, and these get drained off during the butter making process and into buttermilk, which is why sweet cream buttermilk is such a great emulsifier. That's why in my recipe, in addition to milk, I add heavy cream, which contains a good amount of those emulsifying fats. And I like the texture with 1 part heavy cream to 2 parts whole milk. Heavy cream is such a good concentrated form of these fats that it allows us to easily make modifications to this recipe. Classic vanilla is the traditional flavor for red velvet cake, but this frosting can go in many different directions. And the idea is that if you keep a couple core ingredients constant, you can modify the others to come up with some really unique flavor combinations. To understand how to modify this buttercream, it's easier if we break down the composition into modifiable sections. So I have the butter, and then I have the sweetened flour paste, which is the heavy cream in the milk, the sugar, and the starch. The things that we don't want to touch here are the butter and the
the heavy cream. The other components are more or less fair game. So I'm going to briefly cover starch substitutions here, but you can find a more detailed write-up on my blog. I tested various flours, expecting differences in the Ermine Buttercream stability, as gluten in wheat flour is thought to contribute to it. However, I found that gluten plays little to no role. Most flours I tested were gluten-free, and the frosting's stability remained consistent. I found that the more important factor is the starch's gelatinization strength, its ability to gel and firm up a liquid. You can check my blog for the current substitutions, including how to use cocoa powder to make a chocolate version.
Now the milk substitution is where I had a little bit of fun with flavors. You can either use water or whole milk ideally and steep things in it like teas and herbs, and then use that in place of the whole milk in the recipe.
So to demonstrate the fun you can have here, I created a Boba Shop Frosting Collection. And first up is my Korean banana milk buttercream. For this one, I'm going to swap out just one thing, the whole milk for pre-made Korean banana milk. And the process is exactly the same. I'm going to heat the sugar, flour, banana milk, and heavy cream until thickened and allow that to cool and mix that into whipped butter. I'm not sure how they get this banana milk to not taste very artificial, but the end result is so delicious with just the right banana flavor. When I was at the store, there was also taro, melon, and strawberry milk. Those could all be easy modifications. With my second flavor, I went with a Thai green tea buttercream. This expands on the idea that you can steep flavors into water and use that in place of whole milk. For this one, I'm going to swap out the whole milk for tea, and to change things up, I'm going to substitute the all-purpose flour with tapioca starch. What I found worked best is to double the concentration of tea. This will ensure that you get a strong enough flavor as it will get diluted with the other ingredients in the buttercream like the butter and heavy cream. So for this recipe, instead of using 5 grams of tea leaves for 300 mils of water, I'm going to use 10. I'm going to steep that for 4 minutes and then strain out the leaves. I also find that these steeped liquid Ermine recipes need a bit of sweetness above what's indicated in the base recipe. So what I do is sweeten the tea concentrate with a bit of sugar. And this is up to you. I liked about 2 tablespoons of white sugar. And because that usually creates more tea liquid than what you need for the recipe, you're gonna have to measure out the exact amount to replace the milk. So for a 3-cup recipe, that's 1 cup of sweetened tea. And then I'll just proceed with the same protocol. I'll make the flour paste, let it cool, and then add it to whipped butter. And this one was so good. Thai green tea is different than the one that you probably get at your local Thai restaurant that's made with black tea. It's very floral, usually made with jasmine as well as other flavors like pandan and vanilla. The moment I opened up this bag of tea, I was in heaven. It smells exactly like the Thai desserts I grew up eating. I also did a Vietnamese coffee version, which follows the exact same concept and yielded one of the best and potent coffee buttercreams I've ever tasted. And for the last version, I made a strawberries and cream buttercream using a puree from frozen strawberries and a little bit of sugar. I pureed and strained the strawberries, then substituted the puree for whole milk and cooked it as usual. An interesting observation is that I tried to make a version of this using mochi flour to make a strawberries and cream mochi buttercream, but the texture was a little bit off. And I think this was because of the puree's fibrous content, which reduced the water ratio and was unable to hydrate the rice flour properly. So for a fruity Ermine, I recommend using fruit juice because then you can use any type of starch. But if you want to use a puree like I did here, make sure to only use all-purpose flour. I can try to develop a more generalized fruity Ermine recipe if there's enough interest.
Speaking of developing recipes, if you want to try any of these, they're linked down below. I even have a no-cook version of Ermine buttercream that uses instant pudding. I didn't have time to go over it today, but my favorite flavor of this modification is the cheesecake one. It yields a light and creamy frosting with a light cream cheese flavor. You can make it in about 10 minutes with no cooking. So that's all for today. Happy baking, everyone.